I'm the host of the Arab American TV show Bilahdan, a show with an accent for those without one. A lot of news now coming at those after the midterm election, especially the paranoia of the right wing and conservatives, and especially Fox News about the election of the first Somali Muslim Congresswoman, Ilhan Omar. Fox News wrote a huge article about Ilhan Omar being on my show about 3 years ago, and the fact she was explaining that that was right after one of the Al-Shabaab's terrorist act incident. And we were debating that terrorism is a reaction, unless we look at terrorism as a reaction of our foreign policy and the way we demonize people all over the Middle East, say all politics are local, but I think also all terrorism are local. And Fox News thought Ilhan Omar is a radical politician, not worthy of being in Congress, because, as they say, and here I have the article here, she's been on a radical show, and Ahmed Sarwat has a radical view, and I stated some of the things I said throughout my last 20 years on the show. So let's talk about the Somali community. It's a tremendous community here. They brought Islam and Muslim to the spotlight since they came about 15 years ago. We have a playwright. She, created a beautiful play. It's called How to Have Fun in the Civil War. I know that.
I wake up earlier than my brothers so I can sit in the bathroom and do my new favorite secret hobby. Sniffing cigarette butts that my dad told me to throw away yesterday evening. I love when my dad visits. He smokes a lot and brings me a play dog. We stepped outside of our house. Whoa, even more gun noises. So many people already on the streets. Maybe it's that holiday that Dad, my dad took me to a while back.
I know the name and the title of this play. It's amazing, got my attention. She is, been on BBC. She's been all over the places. Her play, Guthrie Theater and Children's Theater and New York. And she was us as Ifrah Mansour, multimedia artist, and welcome to Bilahdan. That was a long introduction. Sorry about that. But you've been sitting there very nice and patiently, and tell us, how did the idea come about? I know I've seen you talking and telling the story, and I know this is a story from perspective of a young girl, 7 years old, and it's a brilliant way of turning an innocence. How innocent look at this horrible reality that Somalia was going through in the 90s. To take us through it, how this idea developed.
Well, I wrote this play 5 years ago, and that was really close to when I finally decided that I wanted to follow my art passion. But I never felt like I had the right skill set, the right artistic skill set to write my story. So I always shied away from telling my own story. And for me, I experienced Somalia's civil war as a child. So that's the only authentic, real perspective that I have.
So you were in Somalia in 1990?
Yeah, in 1991, my family lived in the capital. And so I specifically remember the day that the war...
How old were you?
At this time, I'm roughly about 5 or 6, but enough that I can remember it.
Almost the same age of the...
Yeah, as the play. I mean, the play is being told by a 7-year-old, and the play does a really good job of capitalizing the child's innocence, and so the child continues to see the world that she creates as a child, as this child's innocence, and so she's able to. The girl thinks that her family is just going to a relative's house who has a fancy home, and but little does the little girl knows that her family are fleeing for their lives, and they're never, and that they're never gonna come back to their home and to their toys and to their pet animals. And so so I really wanted to show to Minnesotans
so this was, excuse me, this is written for an audience.
Yeah.
That's different. You know, you had this audience in mind.
Absolutely. I mean, when I was first writing it, I didn't really think about the audience. I was just like, I finally feel comfortable and safe enough to tell my story. Because a lot of times with trauma, you never get a place of comfort, you never get a place of safe to finally share your trauma with yourself a lot of times.
Deal with it, I guess.
And for me, like, I've gotten to that place and I wrote it down, and then I was like, now I want to share it. And I actually, the first time I shared it, there was not a single people of color in the audience. It was just pure Minnesotans and pure Americans. And of course, most of them were like, what was that? They really thought it was fictional. They really thought it was a made up story. I mean, and then later on, I was like, no, this is a true story. This is what I remember as a child. And then when I first performed the first part of the play at the State Fair, that was like the other interesting place. Very few Somali people made it, and again, it's the State Fair, where
it's a civil war on a stick.
Yeah, civil war on a stick. Basically,
yeah, work.
Basically, I shared my trauma with a bunch of people that were food high. But what I really loved is that there would be like a bunch of kids at the State Fair that are really tired, and then they'll see the puppet within the play, and they'll actually drag their parents and they'd sit down in front of me and they'll watch the play. And then their parents would hear what I'm saying, and then the parents would want to like move their kids. And that's what gave me the idea to like continue to target kid audience, because I'm like, a lot of times kids are way more embracive than adults. Just way more embracive.
Well, they are more also, they're not racist, they're open to ideas. And
kids have not been corrupted by our society's shortcomings, as I like to say. Yeah. Absolutely. But there's,
you're using puppeteering, you know, it's an attraction too for children.
Absolutely. So I built this puppet where at the beginning I really wanted to learn how Somalis created nomadic homes with sticks, and so I built this puppet using Somali nomadic tradition, and then so naturally the puppet is like this very alluring, very present, very protective character, and it played my mother. And it plays my mother. And what's really interesting is that it feels like, you know, with wars, the true heroes, the true unsung heroes of civil or any kind of wars are actually mothers. They find ways to create this sense of safety, create this sense of warmth, in the middle of bombings, in the middle of like darkness. And for me, I really wanted to show to Somalis that we do need to tell our stories, and if we don't tell our own stories, then media is going to continue telling on behalf of us. We have to define
ourselves. We want to tell the story through a young, and the fact that a very destructive environment, and you creating art out of it. What I like about this, and I didn't see the whole show, the mother is kind of not defined. It could be any mother.
She's not defined, absolutely.
And that's by design?
Absolutely, because I'd want, if you think about it, the Civil War was amongst Somalis killing Somalis, sometimes Somali families killing other Somalis. So it's like, it's the victim and the perpetuators are almost the same family. So if you think about it, there's a mother that's grieving for a child that's killed, and there's also a mother that's grieving for the child that killed it. And if you just think about it, all the trauma of that, we all carry that. We all carry that trauma. And for me, I really wanted to focus on the people's stories, the people's strength, more so than the factual, political side of it. Because when we go to that, then people forget to be people. People forget that that both sides have pain. Both sides is feeling pain and is carrying this trauma. And for me, so I'd wanted to create a play that was also peacemaking through our strength and through our resilience.
You took this show in so many different places, here in Minnesota, New York, everywhere, and there are different audience, they say. So, I mean, the audience come to the show with like preconceived ideas, with Somali things, what do you expect, and all of this. So, did you learn anything about
Yeah.
the audience and how you negotiate your story? Do you tell the
Yeah.
same story in every place? Do you change since you started 5 years ago now?
I think it's fascinating. A lot of Minnesotans or maybe Americans ask, why are all Somalis here? And I wonder as an audience, as as an artist, as a curious artist, I'm like, why aren't people asking, how did we get here? And for me, the play really focuses on the journey of how we got here. What led to what that brought us here? Okay, what is it that we left behind to be here? Not all of us like woke up and said that we're tired of the sun. Let's go to Minnesota and like shovel the rest of our lives.
No.
Like
There are only
shitload of
5%
snow.
people that they actually leave their home. It's not that many people.
Absolutely.
It's
So
very hard to leave your family, familiar
absolutely.
places.
Yeah,
But
it's very hard to live a world that all you knew. Like for me, like as a 7-year-old, all I knew was like the world that I knew, like in Somalia, like speaking Somali, seeing Somalis everywhere. Going to Duxie and like having my teacher beat me and like trying to find ways to get away from my teacher beating me and like practicing my Quran. And for me, that's the world that I knew. And then I found myself in a world where my teacher would be staring at me as if I am an animal in a zoo, or my classmates would try to, to talk badly in English. Like my first few months in America was not the greatest. And like I'm wishing more Americans and more Minnesotans would ask themselves, like, how did we get here? And when we ask that question, we kind of, we don't necessarily go to the stereotypical answers.
Shabab or
yeah,
whatever.
all
the
of that,
thing,
they burn their country.
It's interesting as an artist,
Yeah.
people in Somalia, that they gone through the Civil War and they took a different venue, violence,
Absolutely.
Shabab, whatever. You took art to deal with this and the redemption aspect. So after you wrote this 5 years ago, now you saw it. Tell us what the transformation for you as a person, as living in Minnesota.
I mean, for me personally, I'm at a place where I'm naming all my traumas. I am also inspiring all my community to name our traumas, because if you think about it, the Civil War has been going on for the past 30-some years, and Somalia is in reconstruction, as I like to say, is in a peacemaking phase, as I like to say. We all have to come sit down and sort of pause for a moment of not just reconciliation, but also regrowth, reflect, and what does it look like for everyone to know all the pain that you've gone through as another fellow Somali, and I just want to be part of that community that pushes my community to start thinking about what does multi-generational healing looks like. What does healing looks like when you live outside of Somalia is very different than when you live in Somalia, and you're constantly reminded by the trauma. And for us here, to be here in America and to have this, for me, I feel like I'm lucky. I get to sit down and work on my trauma. I get to inspire fellow Minnesotans to do that. And I just think, if we think about it right now, we do have the most refugee community, like refugees all over the world. And yet, in most of those refugees, whether they're Syrians or the Rohingyas, we actually watch them real live on television, like all the news coverage, and yet we have the hardest time empathizing, connecting, and understanding their plight.
That's a beautiful point, because when we look at the
Doesn't
Syrians,
that make your heart cringe?
Isn't it something?
Yeah, because
and that's what art is.
Absolutely.
You brought those trauma of Civil War.
Yeah.
Now we look at Somalia differently through your play.
I really hope so.
And I mean, the Syrian went through this. A Syrian child, has gone through it. But all we know that the Syrian child that was drowned by the beach.
Exactly. And remember, we only have an image, like
exactly.
unless there are a lot of Syrian artists, by the way, that are doing phenomenal work.
Exactly.
Unless the refugees themselves, ourselves, like stand up and say, "This is my story," and we tell you. It's very different when an ally tells your story. It's very different. And the other thing is, like for me, my refugee experience was 20 years ago. No one saw it. In fact, I actually need my parents to help me tell my own refugee experience. Meanwhile, anyone that had a refugee plight within the last 10 years, there's a way for us to like click somewhere and to see that actual experience. And yet, we've never been more so far removed from the refugee plight, and it just crunches my heart.
And this has been happening for a long time.
Very much.
The Orientalists did that when the European went to North Africa and Arab and Europe, and they tell story, literature, art, fun. Image is very powerful in a sense.
Yeah.
It defined the power relationship.
Absolutely.
So when you see somebody, a kid running after a Western-looking guy in a car and he asking for money and handing him,
and that image gets played and played over and over again.
You define the power. So you're not telling their story. You're telling that you are more powerful than the natives. And I think in your play, and it's interesting, it is from a 7-year-old girl perspective. This is very universal. You can relate to any child. You can relate to anybody through pain.
And then the adults sort of like the adults like are disarmed. They're not able to like use their brains and whatnot, and they're able to fully receive the story. And they're not like saying, "Oh, poor you." They're fully able to receive the story. Yeah, absolutely. There's just so much work for us to do.
You use video, you use poetry, you use puppeteering, and. How do you weave all this in the story?
Yeah. For me, like I realized that whenever you do work that's about trauma, it's very easy to re-traumatize the audience and to re-traumatize the survivors that are in the audience. So you have to do a lot of safety, community safety building. And for me, I was able to use a lot of art forms that have a lot of gentle and tenderness, such as poetry, such as children telling the story versus then adults telling the story. And what else? And I interviewed 17 other people. So the play, even though it's being told by a 7-year-old, there's all these other 17 other Somali Civil War survivors themselves that are also co-telling the story. So it's like a true multi-generational storytelling. Those 17 people that I interviewed, I had them drink the sexy Somali tea. That is very sweet, and it makes everyone feel warm and safe to a point that 17 other Somali people shared their stories, their traumas, their pain, their joys, their strength, and the play is even more beautiful and powerful.
It is really, and I think when you mention drinking tea, and I know this American guy went to Afghanistan and wrote a book about his experience. He was building schools to liberate young women and educate them.
Of course, we always need liberation, don't we? Exactly. Darn it!
And he calls it 3 cups of tea.
He had 3 cups?
Well, this is like a culture proverb in Afghanistan.
Okay.
When you have the first cup with a host, you are a stranger. You just came in. Second cup, you are a friend. Wow. The third cup, you are a family.
Wow.
And the idea was
he must do dishes after the third cup.
He wants to be a family from the first cup. The next step is, well, thank you so much for coming in and telling your own story. Well, that concludes our show. We'll see you next week. Assalamu alaikum and God bless you all.
Salam you all.
Very delicate.
I wake up earlier than my brothers so I can sit in the bathroom and do my new favorite secret hobby. Sniffing cigarette butts that my dad told me to throw away yesterday evening. I love when my dad visits. He smokes a lot and brings me a play doh. We stepped outside of our house. Whoa, even more gun noises. So many people already on the streets. Maybe it's that holiday that